I'd love to hear from just two people. Sort of why does this topic matter to you and or your workplace? We hope you had good conversations in your breakout room. We'd love to hear from at least two people. Who would like to share?
This is Valeria.
Hey, Valeria.
Can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I think it's important. I brought this up in my group because what our department does, I work for the Department of Economic Inclusion, and our department does certifications for minority, small business, and women-owned businesses. And so I think implicit bias is really important because of the types of owners that we come across every day. So we have to be conscious of how we approach all of these different business owners and how we view them, because just as an individual, you sometimes have that ability to take your own personal beliefs, your own personal whatever, and interject that on somebody that you're working with, not meaning to, but it may be because of the environment you grew up in or whatever. And so when you're certifying a company, you have to be able to look at them objectively and not judge them based on, you know, what you think of that individual or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a very, very practical reason for why this matters, and kind of having that impartiality, that neutrality, which is so hard because, like you said, how we grew up, what our environment is, all those things. Biases. Thanks, Valeria, for sharing that. Can we hear from one more person? Valeria brought that bravery forward, broke the ice. Who else is out there? Moved.
Joe, this is Berlinda.
Belinda?
Hi. I was talking in my group and I was sharing that I think it's important because it, number one, I think, you know, a lot of us have been victim of it, some more so than others probably, and it allows us to recognize what our clients and program participants go through every single day. People may not know a thing about them, but just their physical appearance has caused them to be judged. And then we talked about how dangerous it is in society. You know, George Floyd is a perfect example, just simply because of how he looked, how, you know, big guy, you know, just color of his skin, just judged right there in that moment, know nothing about him, and it led to his death. And so it is dangerous to operate from that place and to keep it going.
Yeah. Thanks, Belinda. Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for saying that. I think this has implications, of course, not only for our own actions and biases that we bring, also how we personally been impacted by bias, and certainly the clients and the individuals that you all work with in the community across all the organizations represented here. I think that's one of the things we'll talk about, and you'll see in the build of the session today, when we talk about bias. We're going to move into a video here just to kind of set up the conversation. But, you know, one of the things that we'll talk about is the fact that bias is something that is present and is just a part of human nature for everybody. There's no shame in it, and knowledge is the first step. Also talk about is once you have that awareness and that knowledge, it's incumbent upon you, it's your responsibility to take action to dismantle it. And when bias is applied in ways that are harmful for oneself or for others, that's when it becomes very broad. Catastrophic. So with that, this is a hard conversation. We're going to take a minute to look at a video to kind of break the ice a little bit. This is from a clip.
This is a big story. Last week, the organization decided to allow girls to join, and they officially changed their name to just Scouts. Yeah. Cool. Now, of course, a lot of people have opinions about this, and they're wondering if making the organization co-ed is a good idea. We haven't talked about it yet. What do you think, Andy?
Well, I don't want to sway anyone's opinion, but I did get my hands on some footage from the co-ed scout camp. I think a lot of you will find it very troubling. Take a look.
Which one of you did this? Which one of you did this?
Hi, I'm Andy Richter, and I'm here to talk to you about implicit bias. If you watched that clip and assumed the owner of the curling iron would be a girl, then you just showed implicit bias. Something to think about. Okay, I think we got it. Let's give it up for my camera operator, Sam.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hi, me again. And if you assume my camera operator, Sam, was a man, you've once again shown implicit bias. Check your bias. Okay, guys, we're really done now. I have to take my car to the mechanic. Yes! My mechanic is a woman. Damn it, people. This is exhausting. I'm spending the rest of my day fighting against gender inequality.
Hi, I'm Conan O'Brien. And if you really thought Andy was going to spend the afternoon on activism instead of taking his usual nap, then you just showed implicit bias.
Hi, I'm Andy Richter, and if you thought Conan wasn't going to be a grade A douchebag about this, then you showed implicit bias.
Hi, I'm Conan O'Brien. And if you thought Andy wasn't going to get way too emotional and overreact to my teasing, then you...
Hi, I'm Andy Richter, and if you thought this sketch was better before Conan inserted himself into it, then you...
Hi, I'm Conan O'Brien. And I'm sorry, but the last time I checked, the show's called Conan.
Hi, my name is Philip Cunningham. And if you thought Joe was coming back, that was, no, I'm kidding. It's not implicit bias. We actually just thought it was a really great way to transition into me talking about this stuff. So when we say implicit bias, it's important to know that we're not calling all of us horrible, hateful people. But I want to be sure, though, to let you know that we're also not saying that it is okay to actively set out to be racist, sexist, homophobic, ageist, or any other of the ists that goes on. Implicit bias is everywhere. We all have it, but nobody really wants it. So the question becomes, what exactly is it? And so the first step really is to start to build our knowledge around what it is. So implicit bias comes in a bunch of different forms. According to the Kirwan Institute, implicit bias refers to the attitudes or the stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions and decisions in an unconscious manner. To put it simply, when we have bias, rather than being neutral, we have a preference for or an aversion to a person or a group of people. So when we use the term implicit bias, we are describing the attitudes towards people or associations of stereotypes that affect our understanding without our conscious knowledge. We can go to the next slide. Now let's dig a little deeper into the origins of implicit bias. You see, the human brain is like the first computer, and it can take about 11 million pieces of information in any given moment. But like a computer, the brain cannot consciously process all 11 million pieces of data all at once. Because if it did, it will run slower, much like when we have too many tabs open on our computers. But because the brain is really good at adjusting, it takes about 90% of its tabs on autopilot. So things like breathing, digestion, walking, making split second decisions, they all happen at a subconscious level, or just what I like to say, in the background. So only about 2% of emotional cognition is available to us consciously. That leaves about 98% of our emotional cognition to be subconscious thoughts. So bias, that resides in the unconscious networks of our brain. But the question becomes, where did that come from? Why do our brains react that way? And to be honest, it all came down to evolution. The human brain became hardwired to detect danger and to make decisions quickly. All of our purpose has always been about survival. That's what implicit bias originally was for. It was about survival. It was about, you know, if you ate the wrong foods, you potentially could die from it. If you slept out in the cold without the right clothes, you potentially die. Caught, you potentially could die from it. So when you only have a split second on the savannah to decide if that dark shadow was your friendly neighbor or a hungry tiger, you don't really have time to search for more clues. So we had to determine if this thing, if this clue was a friend or foe in seconds. So that's where implicit bias came from. It's ultimately was created to keep us safe and to keep us alive. Implicit bias also fuels our fight or flight response. Today, it helps us immediately react to things that can help or harm us. The question becomes sometimes like, will this person that's racing towards me steal my cell phone? Or what has happened if this car runs a red light? What do I do? That's where our implicit bias kicks in, and it stops us from being in a situation where we potentially could be harmed. In a study at the University of California in San Diego, researchers came to believe that people are inundated daily with the equivalent amount of 34 gigabytes of information every single day. That's enough data to fill up a typical laptop in only a week. This information feeds our biases, which ultimately, again, goes into our subconscious. So food for thought, this is something to think about. But what is the information that we consume what does that tell us about race? What does it tell us about gender? What does it tell us about age? And how are we managing that information? Howard Ross, the author of Everyday Bias, Identifying and Navigating Unconscious Judgments, wrote, categorizing people without realizing it is as natural as breathing, and it allows us to navigate the world. In the modern world, however, these snap judgments can give us the wrong information. Another way that snap judgments show is through first impressions. So Maya, she's actually going to tell us a little bit more about snap judgments.
So we're going to play just a little activity here, and I'm going to pull up a photo now and ask you, what does this person do for work? You can chat in your answers. What does he do? What is his job? So I got no idea, motorcycle mechanic, band roadie, bouncer, construction worker, tattoo artist, lawyer, army, recovery counselor. All right, so with the second photo, this man is actually a doctor. So one of the second question I want to ask is, what clues were you using to tell you what his job was? You guys can also chat that in as well. I see hand model from Phil. He has very nice hands. So tattoos, dress and tattoos, his build, so like his muscles. He seems to like, maybe he works out a lot. Someone said there were none. Stance, tattoos, dress, clothes, shaved head. So psychologists say that when we meet someone for the first time, you only have about 7 seconds to make a powerful first impression. Some say it takes even less time, about 1/10 of a second. And that 1/10 of a second impression stays with us. It doesn't change, usually without a lot of hard work. According to Yale University psychology professor Marianne LaFrance, about 90% of a first impression is based on appearance, which I heard a lot of, posture, facial expressions, tone of voice. Our first impression often determines how we perceive another person. It lets us know about things like a person's warmth, meaning their friendliness, their trustworthiness, their morality, and their competence, meaning their intelligence or their effectiveness. Our snap judgments or first impressions can be skewed by many different types of biases. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about a few of those different implicit biases that might show up. So, a few different ways those impressions can be skewed by our biases. They include the affinity bias, and I'm going to say one word: familiarity is the affinity bias. That's someone that you're familiar with, you're comfortable with. One example that everyone in Cincinnati probably knows is if you get asked the question, are you from the east side or the west side? It's a very important question in Cincinnati. It could be the high school that you went to. It could be a key characteristic or strength. Maybe you're like, I want to be around funny people, people with the strength of humor. I want to be around creative people. It's that familiarity, that comfort level. The next bias is beauty bias, judging people by their looks, so thinking a beautiful person must be a friendly person. Thinking someone has this beautiful smile, they must be trustworthy. That's a beauty bias. Confirmation bias is looking for ideas or people that support what we already think, confirming our beliefs and assumptions. So one example of this is Democratic people only listening to Democratic news sources versus Republican people only listening to Republican news sources, because it's confirming our view of the world already, what we already think. Conformity bias would be groupthink. That's when you go with the group. You don't express your own views on something, so you buy in and agree because everyone around you is thinking that. The last bias is halo and horns effects. So that's when you have that first impression in your mind and it spills over. So you met that person, they gave you a really warm handshake, they had a really nice smile, and you went, oh, this person's nice and trustworthy, and that stays with you. Even if they do things that may contradict that first impression. These powerful biases are the shortcuts our brains use to organize people and situations. And this can have significant repercussions in terms of equity and diversity in at least 3 key areas. Number 1 is hiring and team building. From recruiting to screening to interviewing, these biases can offer cracks and let these things in. Performance management is the second area, how we celebrate winners from losers. Things like salary increases, promotions, awards, who we give them to and why we give it to them. To the third area, which is coaching and giving feedback. So sometimes our biases keep us from seeing the real story. We miss the context or the intent, and then we give out flawed counsel. So we're going to look at an example of one of these snap judgments in the workplace. And as I tell this story, what I want from you guys is to listen out for any of the types of biases that we just went over. They're listed on the screen. And I want you guys to listen for which ones you hear in the story as I tell it. So we're going to talk about an interview with 2 different candidates, John and Malika. John reminds the interviewer of himself or someone he knows, his son, his brother, his pastor, someone he knows and he likes. There's a sense of familiarity or chemistry. John's nervous when he's asked the first question, and because of this familiarity, the interviewer picks up on it. So he wants him to feel at ease, and he says, John, it's just an interview. There's nothing to be nervous about. Take a breath. I'll ask the question again. The interviewer asks John the question again. John nails the question the second time, and he's off to a great start. He has a great interview. The second candidate, Malika, there's nothing negative about her. There's just not a real connection between her and the interviewer. It's a very business-like, professional conversation. It's very buttoned up. She's nervous when she's asked the first question, but the interviewer doesn't pick up on it. When he's asked the next day, the interviewer says, John's great, easy to talk to, he'll fit in with the staff and clients. Malika was okay, I guess. She just seemed a little cold, a little distant. From that story, what are the types of biases you heard in either the interviewer or the candidate? I want people to share out. You don't have to chat it in. You can share out. Take yourself off mute.
I heard the affinity bias. This is Yolanda. Sorry, Cincinnati Works.
Oh, you're good. So who did you hear the affinity bias from?
The interviewer.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other kinds of biases?
Yeah, I'm Sheila. I thought John, the interviewer, used confirmation bias when he was using the comfort for reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other one, the spillover, the halo horn effect.
Impression.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody think that Malika showed any bias? Had any bias impacting her as she walked in?
Sure, the familiarity just because it was someone of the opposite gender.
That's interesting.
I think I also heard that she was dressed or appeared very businesslike and kind of cold. So I said maybe the beauty bias, like.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways you could take the story, a lot of different ways that you could see the biases. So Malika coming into the interview dressed very businesslike and professional. She may have had a bias of, this is a person in authority and I can't share jokes. I can't get too zestful or too humorous or I won't be taken professionally, right? So she kind of overcompensates and goes the other way. You did hear the affinity bias, you know, the interviewer thinks John reminds him of someone that he knows and he likes. You could think the halo and horns effect. You know, the first time he meets her, he thinks that she's cold and distant and he doesn't pick up on the fact that she's nervous, right?
I was just going to say, because of her nervousness, I did hear you say that her nervousness and her professional attire could also come from her training and upbringing. This is how you do for interviews and things like that. But because of her nervousness, that may have given him a type of opinion about her. What bias would you contribute at that to?
I think that could be anything from confirmation bias, like reinforcement of these type of people are cold and distant.
Okay.
Aren't, you know, we don't have chemistry, right?
Yeah.
So that could be one of them.
I think, this is Amanda, I think also someone presents as nervous, then people may question their just overall confidence and ability to be confident in a role. And that's definitely not the case. I can tell you as someone who's really nervous when I first meet people.
All right, so the whole interaction that changed John's entire interview, right? The interviewer says, hey, take a deep breath, right? He reaches out. It took 4 seconds, but it made a major difference. If you ask the interviewer, he'd probably swear he gave the interviews the exact same way with the exact same questions. But because of that familiarity, he picked up on nervousness. Treating it as cold and distant, he picked up on what John was feeling. His own role in influencing the interview is invisible to him, and it's driven by his background of comfort with people like John. So where does that familiarity come from? The next activity that we're going to do is going to show us the people that we're most familiar with and that we're most comfortable with. So this activity is called the Circle of Trust. Beyond snap judgments, there's also a deeper role implicit bias plays in helping you create your inner circle. So I am going to send a file through the chat, and it's going to be a PowerPoint sheet that you can pick up, or you can use a pen and paper for this activity if you don't want to do it online. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes after. I'm going to wait for people to either get their pen or paper or the file and then give me a thumbs up letting me know that you're ready. Got a few thumbs coming up. Great. And give about 15 seconds. Just for the people who are still waiting. You can use either the computer version or you can use just a pen and paper. All right. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write down either the names or initials of 5 to 10 people that you trust. So up to 10, you don't have to put in all 10. You have 2 people that are not in your immediate family that you trust completely. These are the, as Janice calls them, your go-to friends. Your, the people that you would go to in difficult situations and tough places, people that you trust that are not your immediate family. So you're going to write down their names or the initials in one column. And when you've got this list, you're going to give me another thumbs up. Great.
I can't get the PowerPoint to work.
If
I
you
saved
can,
it, I downloaded and saved it, but when I open it up to type into it, it won't let me type into it.
oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry if that. If you can, do you have a piece of paper and a pencil there? Just if you can just make a list with some columns.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, I did, Jeff. I tried enable editing. It didn't work either.
Yeah, mine did the same thing. I just started writing.
Yeah. Okay.
Best
Thank
laid
you.
plans. Apologize
That's
for
fine.
that. The people you trust the most. The people that I love what Maya says. They have the get you out of jail card. You gotta they're gonna save you if you're in a car accident or middle of the night or whatever comes up in your life that you need to have somebody you can truly trust.
Can you give just a few more seconds for people to write down their names or initials? It's not concerning if you don't have 10. I have, actually, it's another thing I'm going to point out, personality differences, because I'm an introvert, so my list is 4. I have 4 people that are outside of my family that I completely trust. And then I have a whole range of people that I know that are my friends, but they're not people that I would call in the middle of the night. All right, so now that you've got your list, we're going to show a few identity categories. So at the top, you'll see gender, race, ethnicity, religion, economic class, and age.
So if you're on the PowerPoint, just click and delete that little bar on the top, that gold bar, and that will reveal the spaces, and or just write them down if you have a piece of paper.
Great. And so you're going to mark an X next to those members in your circle who share the same category at the top with you. If you're unsure or you don't know if they share that category, don't give them a mark. For example, if the category was gender, I would place a mark or an X next to each person that was a woman on my list because I'm a woman. Does that make sense?
I'm not following what you mean by what we're doing. So you put an X if they're what?
If they share that same identity category with you at the top.
With me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So if they share your race, you mark an X in that column. If they share your gender, you mark an X in that column. If they share your religion, you mark an X in the religion column. The chat is making me laugh. Janice says having one person makes this activity easy. All right, so once you've had your X's and your list is laid out in front of you, the question I have is, what makes you trust the people in your circle? What makes you trust the people on your list? And I'm gonna allow time for people to chat in their answers. What made you trust these people that are on your list? Proven situations, long-term relationships, long-term friendships, common values, they're trustworthy, shared history, I've relied on them in the past, been loyal through challenges, have built an authentic relationship with them, past experience, years of experience, right? So they're who you've been around, you're who you're comfortable with, you've been in shared situations together. You know, you might have gone through, as they say, as my mother says, you've gone through the fire together. And so you're fire forged friends. And now I'm going to ask, in what ways are your circles similar to you? So in what categories is your circle similar to you? Is it all of the categories? Is it 1 to 2? Is it a few? Go ahead and chat in. So I've got mostly age and economic class, mostly the same gender. Race is one of them. Most share my gender and race, gender and age. Mostly gender, age, gender. Religion and race, religion. Mostly the same across the board. Most share my gender and socioeconomic. All right. Now, the other side of this question is, in what ways are your circle diverse? So in what ways are your circle different than you? Which categories do you not share? Which identity markers do you not share? All right, gender and age, they're all either older or younger than me. Religion, age differences. Economic class and race, ethnicity. Gender, age, money. Religion, some age differences. So if I were to show my circle of trust assignment with those 4 people, we'd mostly be similar in race and age. And if I were to share in what ways we're diverse, it would probably be concentrated in religion, economic class. All right. Studies show that in general, us humans, we tend to extend not only greater trust, like in that circle, but also greater positive regard. So we tend to think those people are good. If we give them greater cooperation and greater empathy to people more like us compared with people different than us. This preference for people like ourselves is largely instinctive and unconscious. Like Phil mentioned earlier, it's not happening, you know, consciously or setting out a choice to do it. It's something that kind of comes in a second. In the workplace, how does that show up, and who are you going to give the stretch assignment to? Who are you going to give the promotion to, or give, as the story of John and Malika, the benefit of the doubt during an interview to? you're going to give it to the person you find trustworthy. And as this exercise shows, we often find the people who are most like us to be the most trustworthy. Now we know what implicit bias is and how at least one type, affinity bias, might be showing up in our lives. Next, we'll take a look at a few tools to help us combat implicit bias. So, some of you, we've been through the Institute. We'll dive into some of these tools, but we'll refresh your memory. So there's the STOP method. We talked about it for conflict resolution, but it also works really well for addressing implicit bias because it gives you a pause long enough. Some researchers say it takes even 90 seconds to pause long enough to kind of, as Janice says, pull back that lizard brain that we have as humans and use our intelligent, rational selves. It gives you that pause to help you become conscious of potential biases. So first, you're gonna take a minute to see any potential bias and you may be bringing into the situation. Then you're gonna take a wider view. You're gonna dig into context and the intent of yourself and the intent of the person who's in that situation with you. Then you can own your strengths to navigate complexity. So use the strengths that you have, the character strengths that you possess, whether that be social intelligence or judgment or creativity, to find solutions. And then you're going to push back against bias for an equitable outcome. That's pushing back against yourself, but also pushing back when you see bias in your workplace or see it show up. The most important thing is to remember to stop and use your strengths to make a decision without letting implicit bias get in the way. The second tool you can use is your team's strengths with the intent to increase diversity and collaboration. So you can examine the mix of strengths on a team or in an organization, and they'll give you an unbiased lens through which to seek diverse points of view or diverse talent. It helps break down biases you might have in your workplace. The example I like to use is if you work in a bank, you might instinctively look to hire people strong in the strengths of prudence and judgment, but then you're missing out on kindness and honesty. You might, if you're in a startup, be looking to hire creative, zestful folks and forget to include someone with judgment and prudence on your team. How this translates into DEI, into the different identity categories, would be if you associate young people with zest and energy and creativity and all of those new ideas, you may overlook an older candidate. Similarly, if you associate judgment and perspective and wise decision-making with an older candidate, you might overlook a younger candidate with something to offer, right? The third tool that you can use, we've talked about before, is radical candor, the ability to give honest and kind feedback to the people around you. It's the backbone of good communication, and that will help you navigate potential implicit bias. Especially when used with the STOP method, it helps you understand a person's situation while focusing on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. So you can give them direct counsel with their best interests in mind. You want to allow for questions and conversation, all without making unconscious assumptions or relying on artificial stereotypes. And that will help you coach and mentor others without bias. So we are going to, because in Strong Cincinnati, we love practicing and using our tools, and we love giving you guys tangible, actionable things to do. So you're going to have the opportunity to practice some of these methods, and you're going to look at scenarios in the workplace, common scenarios that might come up, and we're going to break you guys into groups to have honest conversations and bring those things with you.
Okay. So I'm going to take over from here. And thank you, Maya, for giving us that really broad view and with some really great examples of how implicit bias can show up in the workplace. And now we're going to as she said, make it happen in real life. So if you recall, we started out saying that there really are 3 different areas, categories, where implicit bias will show up: hiring and team building, performance management and recognition, coaching and mentoring. Well, you're going to get a chance to work with a group. We're going to put you in groups of about 5 people or so to work together to solve a hypothetical situation. And you'll get to pick across 3. We're going to assign you to a different category. And then when you get in there, you're going to have 3 different scenarios to look at. So for instance, in hiring and team building, you may choose to work on something about, if I have to hire an innovation manager, what are some of the strengths or skills or characteristics? How do I describe that in my job description for what I'm looking for? If I'm on a review panel and I'm hiring someone, but people on the review panel are all disagreeing, how do you make the decision? Or maybe you have 2 candidates, Srinivas and Sakim, and they're very close in credentials, and yet you have to decide who to hire. So we're going to use that through the lens of implicit bias. The second category of scenarios are performance management. So you have a bonus you want to give out, limited bonus. Who do you give it to? Or maybe you have a prize assignment. You get to take somebody with you to New York for a great seminar. Who do you take? Or lastly, there are C-suite candidates. We're always trying to figure out who should rise to the top, right? Break through the glass ceiling. Well, you have 2 really viable candidates. How do you select? The third category is coaching and mentoring. So what if you have a very strict policy, 3 strikes and you're out if you break the attendance rule, but somebody has some maybe good reasons why they're doing that? Do you always abide by that policy? Secondly, coaching and mentoring. What if you have somebody who's from the deep South and they're in the habit of always saying, yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, and your VP tells you to counsel them on, to ask them to stop saying that. Is that the right thing to do? What do you do? Third scenario is what I call perfect grammar. Somebody who works for you has a dialect. They use a dialect when they verbally communicate. They write perfectly, but you're now in a tricky situation and you have to figure out how to coach them appropriately, all through a lens of minimizing your bias in the workplace. So the way we're going to do this, and I'm going to repeat these instructions a couple of times because it's simple, but I want to make sure you get it. You're going to have 20 minutes in a breakout, all right, to work collectively with 5 people you may or may not know. There's going to be Maya's going to chat in a link. This is not a PowerPoint. This is a link to a Google slide that you're all going to be able to work on collectively. You'll all see it together. So you should click on it and open it up as a Google slide. That should work, fingers crossed. What I want you to pay attention to is the group that you're in when you get sent off into a breakout room. It always says a room number. Pay attention to that because that's the slide that you're going to work on. So if you get number 3, you're going to advance and your group will work on slide 3. And then lastly, you need to figure out one person in your group can be the note taker, the scribe. That person also will have the ability to share their screen. In your little group, they can share your screen if you want. And you can also, you're going to be able to see, you've downloaded the document. So you should have it on your computer anyway, and you can see it happen live. We can all see it work simultaneously, but it will probably be most effective if one person shares the screen. Okay, so now you're all set up, you're in your group, you're looking at your worksheet, you're on the right slide, and then all you do is you go to, the instructions are all written there, but you'll go to the first column, and on that column, you'll see that there are, oops, sorry, all my animation is just not doing, because I guess the Wi-Fi is not working like it should. Oh, and just so you see that the little blue arrow, that's where you can see your slide, your group number also. So again, you're going to go, if you're group number 1, you're going to go to slide 1. Okay. So then you go to the first column and you'll see that there are 3 scenarios there going down the column. And you're going to pick one of those 3 scenarios that you choose. So you spend about a minute just talking to each other. Which scenario should we work on? And then you'll get to move, the person who's working, the scribe will move, can slide over that scenario, just click on it and drag it over, and it will reveal questions, probing questions that you can then answer in the box below. On the right there, you see all your tools. You can drag a check mark to say, these are the tools that I might use. Most importantly, what you're really trying to do is trying to write your answer, your notes, your questions, any issues you have what are your next steps? How do you address this specific scenario? What's the best resolution? Just collectively come to some questions, come to some answers, because after this, we'll have 1 or 2 groups share out. But the beauty of this is that you will also have this workbook to keep, and you'll be able to see everybody else's work and thoughts, and also use this workbook later in your organizations. You can address some of the other scenarios and sort of have an interesting meeting just discussing how you can address them through bias with other people on your team. So again, I'm going to repeat that now. You'll have 20 minutes. You're going to click on the link that's right there now. You're going to open the workbook, and you're going to open it in Google Slides that you can do right now. Then you're going to advance when you get to your group number. When we send you out in breakout rooms, you'll advance to that slide in that deck that matches your group number. And then you're going to decide one person who can be the note taker, who can actually write on that document.
We would love to, if we, in a perfect world, we'd have plenty of time to hear from each group, but we probably have time for maybe 2 or 3. We'd love to hear from someone, which scenario did you really tackle? What insights did you take away from the conversation? How were you able to address bias? How were you able to use any of the strength strategies that we shared with you to take that on? We'd love to hear from at least 2 different groups. So if the spirit moves you, take yourself off mute and let us know how the conversation went.
This is Valeria. We did the 3 strikes about the hourly employee that's late. And my initial reaction was, the policy says 3 strikes, you're out. And then I said, but if you have, you need to also talk to that individual to find out, because I said, if there's something going on, like if this person has to take public transportation, or something's going on, and then you'd say, well, why didn't you call it? And maybe because they didn't call because they were embarrassed that they have to use public transportation, and so they didn't call because they didn't want to have to explain that. So I said, maybe to sit down and talk with the employee about it. And then we found out there was a box that had some of that same stuff already in it, but we didn't know till there was 30 seconds left in the conversation. Mm-hmm. So we would have brought up those other things, but we didn't know that then. So.
Gotcha. Discovering things around every corner. Well, Valeria, it sounds like one of the things you touched on is, Maya talked about the stop method, and that second part of it, that T, is all about really taking a wider view and seeing the broader perspective of the situation, and just understanding the possibility of public transportation is one example of, like, you might not even consider that if you didn't pause to really think about it. So thank you for sharing that. Can we hear from at least one other group?
And can I also add there also just one thing, that the radical candidate, having that conversation with her, and to be able to, really comes in handy too, to be able to have a warm, strength-based conversation and, be honest and open and challenge her directly, but have that conversation rather than just look beyond it and ignore it.
Sure thing. All right, another group.
This is for Linda. Our group talked about, we had the C-suite candidate scenario, and we talked about certainly at first looking at their credentials, their experience. I know that one person was there longer, but that doesn't necessarily mean the experience is in line. So taking a deeper dive in their background, where they've worked, what qualities and strengths they have, making an assessment of the team already to find out maybe what gaps there were to help us make a decision. But then also the bigger question is, what is the culture of the organization? You have 100% male, you have 100 or 80% male, 100% white. And, if we hire this woman, is she going to be set up for failure because of the culture around being a male? Or this Black male, is he going to be set up for failure because will people follow him? So looking at it, it's bigger than just promoting one of these people. There's a cultural question that needs to be investigated, an assessment of what are our strengths as an organization? Do we have challenges? Are we a place where either one of them can be successful before we just promote one of them? So it was more than just one or the other.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. These situations are so much more complex than they might seem on the surface. And your point about it not just being an either or decision, but really asking, about the culture that exists and the degree to which either of those two individuals will be successful in that culture. We're getting to the, not just organizations focusing on diversity, but really thinking about the level of inclusion and level of equity that exists in an organization. Will those individuals feel, free to be authentically themselves? Will they have an equitable experience with everyone else? It's not as simple as just making those decisions. So I'm glad that you all were able to kind of get underneath that. No quick answers, unfortunately, for these things as well. But really getting in and having these discussions are critical for our organization. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. I want to say, Janice mentioned this, but we hope that this tool can be a resource for your teams as well. There are 9 scenarios on here. If you're having conversations with your team or with your colleagues about implicit bias, about diversity, equity, and inclusion, these could be great scenarios for you to really unpack with your folks and to have these discussions with each other. So we encourage you to do that. We'll send some follow-up emails, follow-up communication after the session to share that too. Janice, if you could move us to our closeout slides. So just to kind of bring it home, really key takeaways for today. If there are things, just 4 things you can remember. First off, we all have biases. It's a natural part of who we are as human beings, as Phil explained to us. Secondly, we know that biases impact workplaces on all levels. Thirdly, we know that the first step in dismantling bias is to build our awareness. It's a big part of what we focus on in today's session. And lastly, once you are aware, it's critical for you to be able to act on that bias and take action to dismantle it. And we know that strengths can be really helpful for that. We know strengths are most critical for the greatest challenges in our lives, implicit bias included. So we have a couple of opportunities in the next 2 weeks to continue this conversation. The first one is coming up next Thursday. You all should have already received an invitation for this. It's our couch conversation. If you came to our 2020 year-end celebration, you can experience that format. We're going to have 2 guests. One is in the session today, Jeff Walton, the Director of HR for Cincinnati Zoo Botanical Gardens, and then Sean Ruglis, who is the President and Chief Strategist at the Catalyst Group. He's also the founder of that organization. Sean works with our organization on marketing and communications and has a ton of experience in thinking about the way implicit bias can play out in those spaces as well. So Philip Cunningham from our team is going to be facilitating that discussion. We really hope you can join us for that one. And then the week after, we're gonna be hosting a couch conversation or a coffee conversation, focusing on hiring and implicit bias. And this is just open to all of our network members to come in and have an open conversation. We'll be there to facilitate. We'll bring some prompts, some discussions, but again, it's just another opportunity to really go deeper in this conversation. Thirdly, you see the little plug down there at the bottom. We have a Facebook group. We would ask for everyone to take a moment to follow that and to join that. We'll send a link after the session. We share updates, information, lots of posts, all kinds of information around character strengths in workplaces. So we would love for everyone to join that group. Lastly, next to last, our 2021 monthly calendar. We sent this out to our network a couple of weeks ago, but this will give you a snapshot of what to expect in the months ahead. We'll send this as well in our follow-up communication, but wanted to make sure you all are looking for that. And then truly, lastly, as you know, if you've ever done a session with us, we always want feedback. So this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, this is new content for us that we've developed. We're excited to roll it out to you all. We are focused on continuous improvement and always making a better product. So we'd love it if you could just take 2 or 3 minutes to click on the link in the chat and just let us know about your experience today. What was effective? What went well? What did you learn? What could be better for next time? We read every single comment and we just really, really appreciate you all taking the time. So with that, we're going to go ahead, click on the link to the survey. We'll be sending some follow-up communication. This session is also recorded, so if there are folks in your organization who would love to see this or should see this, you have an opportunity to share it with them in that format as well. If any questions, need anything from us, you can always reach out. But thank you so much for being with us today.